So we said that. I think we're on 27.6. I think so. All right, right around there. I know we said Paul VI suppressed the anathema, so I think we're on 27.6. The moral doctrine of the Roman Church is holy, for it teaches in a most perfect manner all of the duties of men toward God. And look at the footnote. Vatican II, however, teaches a heresy concerning the moral order, namely that each man has a right to religious liberty, to profess and practice whatever religion is in accordance with his conscience. That is a dethronement of Christ the King. That you have the right to believe whatever you want. There is a law of belief, and the law of belief is the faith, Catholic faith. You don't have, all rights are rooted in God. A right is a moral faculty, it's the definition of a right, to do something good. You don't have a right to do something evil. It can be tolerated. See, don't confuse religious liberty with religious toleration. The object of toleration is an evil. The object of right is a good. So toleration is, as I've said other times, is to look the other way. It's not even a permission. It's not a permission. It's to look the other way. In other words, to not repress something for fear that it would cause a greater harm or that some greater good might be thwarted. It's all out of the textbook and all of that stuff. That's a moral philosophy. Right? So the object of toleration is an evil, but the object of right is a good. You cannot have a right to do something wrong. And when it refers to the law of belief, it's a heresy. It's condemned by Quanta Cora. But you see, you can't do ecumenism with Protestants if you're saying you don't have a right to exist. Error has no rights. Pius XII said that. Leo XIII said that. So that means Lutheranism has no right to exist. That's how you start out your ecumenical meeting. You don't have a right to exist. You're nothing but a group of heretics. You're not a church at all. And that's exactly the attitude of the Catholic Church. It is not a church. There's only one church. They are groupings of heretics. That should be the Lutheran grouping of heretics instead of the Lutheran Church. Again, because where is their lineage? Martin Luther? It's like vomit. It's true. He's vomit. This book's about Luther there. The Grisar was very good on Luther. I mean, he was just a filthy man. So, Ratzinger taught that the use of birth control devices is not sinful. He said that female prostitutes in Africa can use birth control devices so as not to contract AIDS. That totally destroys all Catholic morality. It's just like an atomic bomb, because birth control is against the natural law. If you say that there is an exception to the natural law, you blow up the whole thing. The natural law is as unchangeable as God is unchangeable. Nature comes from God. All right? So he blew it up. So, well, the next question was, well, what about let's see, Yes. What about the males? Can they use? And then he said a few days, yeah, they can use it too. Condoms. This is the darling of the conservatives. Yes. So my question is, do you have to be a card-carrying prostitute? In other words, do you have to have? Are you in the prostitutes union, or some sort of identification that you are a prostitute in order to disobey the natural law? Obviously not. Everybody's going to do that then, because if a prostitute can do it by nature, then everybody can. And once there's just no exception to natural law. So I'm pointing that out as something evil. In other words, that this is contrary to the church's holiness. Pius XI was absolute on that in Caustica Nobili. Anything at all that prevents conception is seriously sinful. Bergoglio taught that adultery and fornication are not sinful. See, that people living in adultery can approach Holy Communion. So either he's approving sacrilege, which is receiving Holy Communion in the state of mortal sin, or he's approving adultery. That is, you're invalidly married, but, it's okay. One or the other, it's lack of holiness. That's why I'm pointing this out. He also authorized the blessing of sodomitic couples. And, it's not the couples. The Germans, however, just a few days ago, in their conference said that we're going to bless couples, sodomitic couples. The Vatican said nothing. German Conference of Bishops. So here comes the bride, or whatever. Here comes the husband. So I'm pointing that out, that this doesn't stand up to in other words, the moral doctrine is holy. And this is why the Novus Ordo is bogus. So, duties of men toward God himself and his neighbor, and defends the rights of civil authority, the freedom of the Christian religion, the unity of matrimony, the excellence of the evangelical counsels from either dissolution of the doctrines or an excessive severity, and does this fearlessly even if secular powers should be in a rage. It points out to each man, to the domestic society, to the civil society of men, the law of justice and charity, and the holiest discipline of morals. See, none of this, it holds up under the Novus Ordo. Documentation for this can be found in the Acts of the Councils and the Canon Law and in the encyclicals of the Roman Pontiffs, etc. And that was always true of the Catholic Church. It was the beacon of morality in the world. St. Augustine seems to have placed in a summary the most noble precepts of the Church. Quote, "Your training and teaching are childlike for children, forcible for youths, peaceful for the aged, taking into account the age of the mind as well as of the body. Thou subjectest women to their husbands in chaste and faithful obedience, not to gratify passion, but for the propagation of offspring and for domestic society. You give to men authority over their wives," oh my goodness, and not to mock the weaker sex, but in the laws of unfeigned love. Thou dost subordinate children to their parents, in a kind of free bondage, and dost set parents over their children in a godly rule. You bind brothers to brothers in a religious tie stronger and closer than that of blood. Without violation of the connections of nature and of choice, you bring within the bond of mutual love every relationship of kindred and of every alliance of affinity. Thou teachest servants to cleave to their masters from delight in their task rather than from the necessity of their position. You render masters forbearing to their servants from a regard to God, their common master, and more disposed to advise than to compel. Thou unitest citizen to citizen, nation to nation, yea, man to man, from the recollection of their first parents, not only in society but in fraternity. Thou teachest kings to seek the good of their peoples. You counsel peoples to be subject to their kings. Thou teachest carefully to whom honor is due, to whom regard, to whom reverence, to whom fear, to whom consolation, to whom admonition, to whom encouragement, to whom discipline, to whom rebuke, to whom punishment, showing both how all are not due to all, and how to all love is due, and how injury is due to none. Beautiful quote from St. Augustine, Catholic Church, and it's all true. And look at Rerum Novarum, the condition of the working classes, and that's held up, by Leo and Francis. That's why Leo took the name Leo, because of Rerum Novarum, not because of his other encyclicals, which may be a little bit negative with regard to what he's thinking and doing. But the Rerum Novarum, because of the condition of the working classes, all he said in there was that the employers should treat the workers with justice, and the workers should treat the employers with justice. In other words, that he was there was a movement of socialism and even communism among workers in the 19th century against employers. See, so he was just saying there should be a balance here, that employers should not treat their workers like dirt, and they were treating them like dirt. And the on the other hand, the employees should have a good attitude as well. And that's all it says. It's not some big, it's not the Communist Manifesto of the Catholic Church, not at all. But that's what they like to see it, as a social teacher, But the rest of what Leo taught. I mean, his whole tract on the church would deny everything that Vatican II ever said. So, in the sacraments, that's holy in the sacraments, the sanctity of the sacraments can be considered, 1, in the sacraments themselves, and mostly in the sacrifice of the Mass. 2, in the liturgy, which explains the use of sacred things. So the ceremonialia, you might say, the liturgy, in the hierarchy to which the care and administration of sacred things are committed. But the sanctity of the Roman Church in each of these things is outstanding proof. By means of the 7 sacraments which are preserved intact by the Church, the salvation of man is taken care of, since it strengthens the whole course of life, from the first day of birth to the last hour, with those helps which are marvelously ordered to 2 things, namely to the perfection of man in those things which pertain to the worship of God, according to the religion of Christian life, and also as a remedy against the defect of sin. So you have the sacrament of penance for things that are, we're talking about mortal sin, how it's, worse than shooting yourself in the head with a gun. But it's so easy to fix. You're contrite, you're sorry for it, you go to confession, come out of the confessional, you're all done. I mean, imagine if you could cure cancer that way. You just go in for a few minutes and you come out. See? Or, like a brain that you just shot through with a gun. Imagine if you could get it fixed like that. And so, I mean, it's really very easy to go to heaven. The path is very, very easy, because morality is congruous with your happiness. When you have a good conscience and when you're doing the right thing, there's a certain interior happiness with that. When you're doing something wrong, you're not really happy. You might be distracted by material things or filthy things, but you're not really happy. Kids, for example, are happy when they're well behaved. When they're being good. So they're happy. The Catholic priests throughout the whole world do sacred things, and since these things which are contrary are more apparent when they are placed next to each other, so we know that the Roman Church exceeds the Church of the Protestants in sanctity, inasmuch as nearly all of the worship of this sect is contained in preaching, whereas among Catholics the center of religious worship is the sacrifice. See, so it's the sacrifice of the cross, and also the spirituality of Catholics is that you must bear the cross. In other words, that's how you effectively worship God is by bearing your cross. And whereas in Protestantism, there's no idea of bearing the cross. You enjoy life as much as you can. There's no mortification. And then you just have good feelings about God. There's some sort of notion of faith, and that's Protestantism. So it's all based on preaching. That's you go and hear sing hymns and hear the preacher. That's it, or else rock music. They do, or some form of music. So not anything good. But that's it. It's faith excitement. What they call faith, some interior experience of God or some good feeling about God. So that's why you go to church. It's completely different from the Catholic notion of sacrifice. By baptism, you are empowered to offer the sacrifice of the Mass through the priest. In other words, you are able to give a sacrifice to God, but through the action of the priest. That's the whole idea of Catholic worship. So, the holiness of the liturgy in the missal rituals and the other liturgical books is evident. For whatever the priest prays or does in the Mass, that is, prayers, ceremonies, is very religious. Similarly, is the holiness of faith and charity expressed in the sacred rites of the consecration of a church, the consecration of an altar, the ordination of a priest, that is, in the whole Roman pontifical, in the offices of the Nativity of our Lord, Holy Week, Easter, Corpus Christi, in the feasts of the Blessed Virgin Mary, in the offices for the dead, in the whole Missal, in the Canticles, Veni Creator, Te Deum, Vexilla Regis, Stabat Mater, Dies Irae, Pange Lingua, etc. The combination of all these things, which the sacramental life and the sacrifice makes the whole church a spiritual vineyard. See, all these things are absent in the Protestant religion. The uplifted mind cries out, how delightful are thy tabernacles, O Lord God of hosts, and the heart abounding in consolation subjects itself entirely to the divine majesty. This is all about the traditional Mass. There shines forth in this tabernacle the infinity of divine perfections, justice and mercy, the grace and kindness of our Lord Jesus Christ. The poor are satisfied, the humble are exalted, exiled men are uplifted to heavenly things. Eternity and time live together. All things are full of the wisdom and the charity of him who taught to the world, be ye perfect, and I will refresh you. See, so that's a beautiful description of Catholic liturgical practice. The institution of the hierarchy is profaned when either the character or notion of order is destroyed. But the Roman Church has never ceased to protect both the character and the notion of order of the hierarchy against the heretics and the Caesaro-papists. Very important statement. In other words, it is not, the Novus Ordo is not protecting the character and notion of order against the heretics. See, first it was against the heretics, then the Caesaro-papists, that means all of those kings, either in the West or in the East, who were trying to control the church. That's Caesaro-papism. Caesar being the government. And Byzantium did it terribly, and Russian Orthodox. But in the West, you had kings. You had the emperor in Germany who was trying to control the papacy, and monarchs on and off would interfere with the church. They always wanted to appoint their own bishops. Alexander VI gave the King of France the ability to name bishops, but not to invest them with power. And that's what Napoleon wanted. He didn't want the nod from Rome. And that's why he at least yelled at Pius VII. He had him at Fontainebleau. He already had him virtually imprisoned in Fontainebleau, which was one of the royal palaces that was a little to the south of France. And And he lived in a beautiful room. I saw the room 2 years ago that he lived in. I mean, he was perfect. You know, it was not a dungeon by any means. You know, a beautiful room and everything was fine that way. But he wanted to. See, the one thing missing to Paris was the head of the church. See, that would be perfect, and then Paris would just be the center of the whole entire planet. See, but it was missing something, so we had to get him out of Rome and bring him to France. You have to live in France for a while to understand those things. So the Caesaropapism, yes. For this reason, the Roman Church exceeds Protestantism in sanctity, since Protestantism has completely lost the character of hierarchy. It excels over Phocianism, by which the order of the whole hierarchy to Peter has been subverted, and the ecclesiastical freedom has been excessively subjected to the civil power. So Protestantism, at least in its origins, was subjected to the civil power in Europe. And to, I mean, technically it is in England, technically it is in Sweden. I'm trying to think of other places where the head of state is also the head of the church. So that's Protestantism. In members, the sanctity of the members appears, one, in the founder of the church, our blessed Lord, in its members, in its institutions, in its miracles, but sanctity of this type is evident in the Roman Church. The founders of the church are Christ and the apostles. So Christ, obviously, the principal founder, but he founded it upon the apostles. That's usually what is said. This is evident from two facts. The Roman Church has a public succession by which, through its pontiffs, it goes back to St. Peter and to the divine founder of the church. So again, that's very important, that succession. The heretics and the schismatics have not yet been able to prove the human origin of the Roman Church. Who founded it? Who cooked it up? There's nothing in history that leads to anything but Christ. Not a single thing can they come up with except Jesus Christ. 2, the holy members and men who were of the most outstanding virtue have not been lacking in the Roman Church. In fact, they have abounded. So the point will be here that, again, if you follow the instruction book, you are holy. If you don't follow the instruction book, you're not going to be holy. See, so, you know, the church is not going to say that all of its members have been holy, not even its members of the hierarchy necessarily, but that is not part of the instruction book of the Catholic Church. In other words, it is people who are disobeying what they ought to be doing. See, if you know, it's a general principle that men do not read instructions. Do you know that? Like when you get something in the mail, if you're a true man, you will not read the instructions and throw them away. And you will figure out how to put this thing together and make it work. Whereas women will read the instructions. They probably make the thing work faster than the man does, but in any case. But that's typical of men, is not to read instructions. Bad sign. There is a way of acting in a Catholic manner, and yet, you know, nobody can force you to do that. If you don't act in that way, you can't hold that against the Catholic Church. If the Catholic Church prescribed things that were sinful, then you could hold it against the Catholic Church. So in other words, if you follow all the rules of the Catholic Church, you're going to be holy, and that's what he's pointing out. About 1/3 of the Roman pontiffs have shown forth, either by martyrdom or by the heroic virtue of confessors, among them Clement I, Leo the Great, Gregory the Great, Nicholas I, Gregory VII, Innocent III, Pius V, and of course John the 23rd, and John Paul II, and John Paul I, and probably Francis, and soon to be Leon. I'm being sarcastic. All right. Besides the great number of confessors, martyrs, and virgins, among whom are found most illustrious princes, Louis IX, Edward, Stephen, Henry the Emperor, Cunegunda, Elizabeth, all of those were in one way or the other rulers. Cunegunda, did everyone know who Cunegunda, who she was? She was the wife of Saint Henry, Cunegunda. So, it's an unusual name. But, I haven't had that one in confirmation yet. That's when I have to do confirmation. I haven't gotten I've gotten some odd ones, but not Cunegunda. Maybe in Germany. And then bishops Ignatius of Antioch, Irenaeus, Athanasius, Chrysostom, Martin of Tours, Boniface, Cyril and Methodius, Anselm, Bonaventure, Antoninus of Florence, Charles Borromeo, Francis de Sales, Alphonsus Liguori. Priests Jerome, Bernard of Clairvaux, Thomas Aquinas, Vincent Ferrer, Francis Xavier, Philip Neri, Vincent de Paul. Virgins Cecilia, Agnes, Clare, Catherine of Siena, Teresa, Angela Merici. The Roman Church does not cease to be honored by the fortitude of martyrs, from those who are placed in the catacombs all the way to those who have emerged as victorious heroes from the rage of the Japanese and the Chinese, like that martyr that you have on the wall upstairs. So that this is not even counting the thousands and thousands who were martyred in the Roman Empire and at other times in the history of the church. Thousands upon thousands of saints. The heroic sanctity of all these is testified to in part by most trustworthy monuments of history and in part by the diligent investigations in the processes of canonization. The volumes of the Bollandists pertain to the Roman Church. So we have the Petit Bollandists in there, but there's actually a bigger version of it. I had the opportunity to buy it, but I think it was $5,000. The Bollandists. They did research on all of the saints of the Catholic Church. And they got in trouble for it because, oh yes, the editor or author of it, because there was a whole sort of committee of people, the Bollandists, I don't know where the name comes from, said that there was no evidence for the fact that the Carmelites dated from the community that Elias made on Mount Carmel. Well, that enraged the Carmelites. See, the Carmelites say they go back to Elias, that on Mount Carmel, which is in the Holy Land, there was a community that Elias formed, and that was the origin of the Carmelites. That's why they're called the Carmelites. And they said there's no evidence for that. So it was almost put on the index, and they made a lot of trouble about it, so anyway, so the holy institutions and the exercise of virtue, of which it would be impossible to relate all the cases. I will recall some, however. First, the orders and the religious congregations. So even if you're not a saint, there are holy people who live very holy lives in these various organizations, these congregations and religious orders, of which the most of the founders are numbered correctly among the saints, such as Saint Benedict, Saint Francis of Assisi, Saint Dominic, Saint Ignatius of Loyola, Saint Alphonsus of Liguori. I mean, you see, you have seen the church after Vatican II. Before Vatican II, there were holy people, there were holy nuns, holy priests, holy religious. You didn't see all of this scandal and dirt, and it just wasn't there. I mean, they were very edifying. I mean, I'm sure there were here and there a few no good nicks, as they say, but that's true of any institution. But the overall, it was very edifying, and I remember it. Don't forget how old I am. I mean, I went to school when the nuns were wearing habits like our nuns do. That was common. That's a nun. See? Yeah. That's when I was a kid. And they were very good. The priests were too. I mean, nobody was a scandal. And if you did anything wrong as a priest, what would happen is that anything seriously wrong, a car would show up at 2 a.m. and you would get in it and you would never be heard from again. That's the way it was handled. Any kind of dirt or anything like that. There was none of this, transferring you around and all this. You just disappeared. You got defrocked. You were gone. So you never, the father is not here anymore. Okay. He went away. So, for example, St. Vincent de Paul by himself stirred thousands of virgins to give themselves over body and soul to God. Secondly, the confraternities, which, in order to adore the mysteries of Christ and to recall the memory of his life, death, and resurrection, instituted for the purpose of fostering the devotion of the faithful, are most useful. So that's another thing that disappeared, was the confraternities. For example, the Society for the Adoration of the Holy Eucharist. See, there would be the All-Night Adoration Society. And once a month they would, there had to be two there all night. In other words, they would switch every hour, but two in front of the Blessed Sacrament the whole night. There was the perpetual adoration. And there was the what was founded by Blessed Peter Julian Amart, perpetual adoration. In other words, that perpetual exposition in their churches. I forgot the name of the order, the Blessed Sacrament Fathers. Blessed Sacrament Fathers. And they had nuns too, sacramentines. And yes, in their churches, and I remember it again, the church in New York, St. John Baptist, and you walk in there, perpetual adoration, a magnificent monstrance on top of a very high altar. And that was, when I was maybe a teenager, I would have been early 60s maybe, but and then I went back, maybe like in the 1990s, the monstrance was empty. It's just so symbolic, because I remember it when I remember going to Vespers there, and Sunday Vespers, it was beautiful, Coram Sanctissimo and everything, just beautiful. And benediction, and I went back and they still have the monstrance up there, but it was empty. I mean, take down the monstrance then, but to have an empty monstrance, it just said so much, So they're probably finished as an order, but that was the St. Peter Julian Amart, or even Blessed St. Peter Julian Amart. So no, there was a lot of devotion. And so the confraternities, Sacred Heart of Jesus, the Most Holy Rosary, the Rosary Society, and every parish church had the Rosary Society, and they had the Holy Name Society. Third, the law of celibate life for the Latin clergy. So the Greeks, the Eastern rites were permitted to do it really out of the hardness of their hearts. But the norm is celibacy for the clergy. And in this country, the Eastern rites were not permitted to marry. They are permitted to marry in Greece and places like that, but not in this country. The Roman bishops said absolutely not. So they couldn't get away with it. And even then, they have to marry before diaconate. And so it shows that the ideal is that they not be. In other words, if they somehow don't find the right girl before diaconate, they're finished. And if they are married, they cannot be made bishops. So the bishops have to be celibate, which shows that the ideal of the priestly life is celibacy. I mean, otherwise the bishops would have a wife, But no, you can't never become a bishop if you have a wife, and you have to get married before diaconate. And that's true even to this day, I think. So, fourth, the practice of praying, which is inflamed by the ordered fruitfulness of pious exercises on annual feast days, by the veneration of the saints, most of all of the Blessed Virgin Mary, by the commemoration of the Passion of Christ, by the law of the canonical hours, the breviary. Breviary takes you probably 90 minutes a day to say. And that's significant when you're busy. Now you have to get it in, because there's a lot of things to do, and it binds under pain of mortal sin. So that's something that you take on when you're a subdeacon. And see, that's, as Pius XII said, that is, after the Mass, that is the liturgical act of the Church, is the divine office. He really emphasized because you are saying the official prayers of the Church as a priest. And it's not just some personal prayer. You know, I said that in a sermon, that it takes about 90 minutes a day. It was, I think, at the ordination in June. The Italian priest said, well, there's some priests in Italy, they do it a lot faster than that. So he said that he knows somebody that can do it in an hour, and I don't know how you can do it in an hour. I just don't know how you can do it in an hour. You don't have to say it out loud, but you have to move your lips as you're saying. It has to be an external, you can't read it mentally. You have to move your lips, so that takes some time. You also have to switch around in the book, you know, it's sometimes complex, a lot of commemorations and so forth. So it takes some time. Now I have a whole system, one of these things that moves around on a swivel. It's like this, but there's 4 of these things and then one thing in the middle. So I say the breviary with 4 books, actually. There's a psalter in the middle, a big book like that, and then 3 breviaries, each one for the proper of the time, one for the proper of the saint, and then one of the saint of the day, or something like that. So it means that I don't have to flip around on a book. I figured that out this year. After 50 years of the priesthood, I figured out that's a great way to do it. But you need a lot of breviaries for that. But you can have strays. There's a lot of stray breviaries, and you know, so there's plenty of those. But we're going to have to reproduce the breviary one day, which is going to be a big job and expensive, but it has to be done. So anyway. So the canonical hours, by contemplative orders and by the facility offered by commonly assisting at divine services day and night. It used to be that all churches were open all day, even during the night, until things became lawless, and people would steal things from the churches, and so now they lock them up. But it was common. You could walk into, when I was a kid again, which is, when dinosaurs roamed the earth, but you could walk into a Catholic church anytime. And people did. They made visits to the Blessed Sacrament. So anyway, the fifth, the practice of fasting, which many Catholics properly observe, and which the Carthusians, Trappists, and others observe with austerity. Sixth, the practice of confession and Holy Communion, which have overcome the most wicked sins of the faithful, or have preserved a great purity of conscience. Seventh, the observance of the evangelical counsels and of ascetical life, by which it happens that the Roman Church has produced the flower of ascetical books, among which are found St. Cyprian's The Habit of Virgins, St. John Chrysostom's On Compunction, St. Ambrose's On Virgins, St. Augustine's Confessions, Cassian's Conferences, St. Isidore's On the Contempt of the World, St. Bernard's On the Love of God. To these should be added the ascetical works of Richard of St. Victor, who was one of the early scholastics, St. Bonaventure, John of Rubrec, and I don't know who that is, Tauler, Blessed Henry of Suzo, Thomas à Kempis, The Imitation of Christ, the works of St. Catherine of Siena, Denis of the Carthusian, of John Galeri Cesare Montani, I don't know who he is, of Louis of Granada, those are very good, Saint Teresa of Avila, and the spiritual exercises of Saint Ignatius. Others wrote works full of unction, such as Saint Francis de Sales, Bourdaloue, Fénelon, those are 17th century figures, Saint Alphonsus Liguori, Faber, and Cardinal Manning. So Father Faber wrote some very beautiful things, and Cardinal Manning. Eighth, it is of extreme importance that the principle of authority engenders and nourishes the humility of faith in the Roman Church. So Catholics believed just to tell you, this all applies correctly to the Catholic Church before the Council. See, none of it applies today. If the Pope taught something, you believed it. So miracles, that the grace of miracles has persevered in the Roman Church is testified to by 1, the witnesses who are worthy of belief, 2, the severe investigation of the Church. So the Church presumes a natural occurrence unless there is evidence of the supernatural. So it doesn't just run and say, oh, somebody had an apparition or somebody had a miracle. Things have to be investigated and proved. And the presumption is that it's natural. The supernatural has to be proven. And there's a lot of phony stuff. There's people that I've been told so many times, people who think they have supernatural experiences, and obviously they don't. So you have to be careful of that when you're a priest. God is talking to me, okay. Things like that, or you just have to. It's very rare that there is a truly supernatural event, so you have to be very careful of that. Don't get drawn in easily. Young priests sometimes are drawn in easily by that. They think that some woman in the parish is like a mystic, and usually not. So, sometimes it's a spirit of the devil too. Spirit of the devil is to be very ostentatious about your piety. It's known as the spirit of the devil. For example, to go up and light a candle in front of Our Blessed Lady and sigh in front of Our Blessed Lady statue and cry. That's the spirit of the devil. If you ever see that. Somebody that's showing off their piety. And the devil deceives them in that way. The devil is working on their pride. Look at me, I'm the most pious person in this. To watch that. That's why you shouldn't wear, except bishops, shouldn't wear medals outside of your, or rosaries around your neck, things like that that are visible. Really, the rosary should not be put around your neck anyway. It's not meant for that. But any kind of some lay people typically wear medals outside or crucifixes outside, and they should be told not to. It's just improper, and if they want to wear the medal or anything else, they can do it inside. It's just as fine, just as good inside. But it's a type of showing off. So, witnesses worthy of belief are Saint Irenaeus, Saint Ambrose, Saint Augustine, as far as supernatural events. Similarly, through the ages, subsequent serious witnesses, either by sight or by hearing, have proven the truth and nature of many miracles. There are some absolutely certain miracles which are recorded to have been performed by Saint Bernard, Saint Dominic, Saint Francis of Assisi, Saint Francis Xavier. Saint Francis Xavier had the gift of tongues, for example. The volumes of the Bollandists, as well as Benedict XIV, not 16th, De servorum Dei beatificatione et beatorum canonizatione fully confirm these facts by means of collected documents and a very diligent examination of the facts. See, Benedict XIV set down all the rules of canonization. He was Pope in the 1750s area. Even the pagans called the Christians magicians because of their miracles. That's related in Origen, Lucanus, Suetonius. Those are pagan authors. Not Origen, but, well, Celsus. Celsus was a pagan who hated the Christians. He was a medical doctor, Celsus. And Origen wrote against Celsus, and he mentions that very fact that he recognizes the fact that there were miracles among the Christians. Celsus would not admit it unless it was true, but it's magic. It's all magic. And the severe investigation of the Church, the writings, morals, and miracles of those who are to be canonized are examined by many cardinals and by many other prudent men who make up the Sacred Congregation of Rites. So they actually have the devil's advocate in that, and that is someone who tries to dig up the dirt on the saint and brings it in purposely. Yes.
Was the Sacred Congregation of Rites part of the Holy Office, or was it?
No, it's a separate congregation. Sacred Congregation of Rites is they handled the canonizations. But yes, they would. John the 23rd went in and complained about St. Pius X when he was being considered for canonization. He was Roncalli at the time, Cardinal Roncalli. And that was in the early 50s, Pius XII. And Pius XII canonized him prematurely because you're supposed to wait, I think, maybe 100 years, something like that, or a long time anyway. And he canonized him early. And I think it was to slap the modernists in the face because he made certain comments that something like Louis XV, after me the deluge, in other words, that the whole thing was so out of control that he couldn't do anything about it. Comments like that. And I think he canonized, just a thought, that he canonized Pius X in order to say, everyone remembered Pius X for one thing, and that is the suppression of modernism. And he put a canonization on that whole thing that he did. He was detested by the modernists. In the seminary of the Diocese of Brooklyn, this was the now deceased Bishop Kelly said that the dogma teacher said Pius X was the rat who condemned modernism. A rat. They hated him, and then he became a saint. But he went in and complained about it. And to a French, somebody, I think was a French journalist, asking him about Pius X, he said he was no saint. He said that when he was Pope, or supposedly. He said he was no saint. And the man said, well, excuse me, but you canonized it, meaning, the papacy did. He said, oh, well, yes, I guess so. But his first reaction was he was no saint. Canonized saint. So, all right, thank you. You can have a seat. So while we're at it, we'll have Liz. Let's see, when is the next time I have you, Liz? Tuesday. I think it's Tuesday. Okay, Tuesday. The next time, anyway, will be 8 through say 18 inclusive.
Through which number?
8 through 18. You have 10 questions. Some important questions. Okay. All right. So 27.21, when it is a question of a miraculous cure, doctors and all those who had care of the sick person are investigated by the postulators of the cause. That means the persons that are proposing the cause of the canonization. Other prominent doctors are brought in order that they testify concerning the investigated manner, etc. All of these are required to swear to the truth of what they are saying before they can give their opinion. So the church does not take canonization lightly. Argument 2, sanctity pertains to that church which by a special providence of God is ordered to the divine good. But this order to the divine good is eminent in the Roman Church, therefore the Roman Church is holy. The minor is proved by some obvious historical facts. The conversion of the world to Christ, as has been done nearly only by the work of the Roman Church. So I told you the idea of converting the empire by what was started out as a group of not illiterate, but let's say non-educated Jews, that they managed to ultimately convert the entire Roman Empire until it became a state religion, is itself a miracle. And St. Thomas points that out. And he says, even if you don't want to believe in the miracles that were done in the early church, the fact that they converted the entire empire is a miracle in itself. And it's actually more remarkable that they could do that without miracles. That's what he says. He turns it back on the objector. You know? That would be more remarkable, that you could accomplish that conversion without doing any miracles. The Roman Church never ceased to be an ardent defender of the Christian name throughout all the ages. It defended the faith in one God against the Caesars, the idolaters, the divinity of Christ against Arius, justice, chastity, and humanity against the barbarians. Remember what I told you about the Germans? What they would do when a man died? I told you that. They would kill the wife and the dogs and then burn them up. That's pretty barbaric. The liberty of the church against the most powerful princes, such as St. Martin I, and many popes against Byzantinism. St. Gregory VII against Henry IV, who left him out in the cold for 3 days. Innocent III and his successors against Frederick II, who was the uncle of St. Thomas Aquinas. The emperor, he was horrible. Pius VII against Napoleon. Finally, the sanctity and perpetuity of matrimony against the heresy of Protestantism concerning divorce and the repudiation of one's spouse, as well as against the inconstancy of the princes. Leo XIII said, for this reason, all generations of men will admire the proofs of unbending courage which are to be found in the decrees of Nicholas I against Lothair, of Urban II and Pascal II against Philip I of France, of Celestine III and Innocent III against Alphonsus of Leon and Philip II of France, of Clement VII and Paul III against Henry VIII, And lastly, of Pius VII, that holy and courageous pontiff against Napoleon I, when at the height of his prosperity and in the fullness of his power. See, he had conquered everything in Europe except one thing: Russia. And he departed, in other words, he broke off that whole thing with Pius VII in order to go conquer Russia. And the only thing that Russia was doing was to not observe the continental system, which was to refuse to the ports of your country British ships. England was the enemy of Napoleon and desired his downfall. And so he set up this continental system. That's all they were doing, but everyone was cheating. And so he decided, well, Russia has to be put in place. And he stupidly went and decided to conquer Russia, which was a really bad idea. And you know the rest of the story. But that was right around the time that he left Pius VII at Fontainebleau and went off and went to Russia, and that was 1812. So that he was at the height of his power, but came back devastated. He still remained in power until 1814. That was Congress of Vienna, which sent him to a place called Elba, which is an island off Italy. And the British said he's going to come back. And no, that's all right. We don't want to humiliate him too much. You know, he became the emperor of the island. Yeah. It's a little island. And yes, of course, he came back. And so, and then, you know, the rest of the story, he gathered up another army and faced the British at Waterloo, and the Prussians too. The Prussians really made the day. You know, could have gone either way, but when the Prussians arrived, that was the end of it. The French just took off when the Prussians arrived, so that was the end of it. And then, as I said, all of the Allies invaded France and Paris and everything, and even his own generals gave up Paris to all of the Allies. He was not happy. So it was Napoleon. Even in these times of the 19th century, this is the author writing, the Roman Church protects the integrity of the Christian religion against any errors whatsoever so worthily and so firmly that it is a light in the sky shining brighter than all splendor. Now look at some of compare this sentence to the Novus Ordo, in which there is found a worldwide and unbridled reign of heresy in Catholic institutions, and of the most foul abominations against the first commandment, against purity, against modesty, and against the royalty of Christ. Next, perennial vitality. For after so many centuries, neither hostile politics, nor false philosophy, nor the loss of nations, nor heresies, or the defections of the faithful themselves have triumphed. In other words, the church has weathered all kinds of problems. The damages furiously inflicted upon her she has repaired, and even when the corruption of morals infected many of the faithful, she was always born again by means of an internal power. These things would be the occasions of her coming back even more powerfully. Like, for example, Luther, the Council of Trent, and all of the flourishing of the church after the Council of Trent. It was far better condition than before Luther. You know, it always had a vitality to come back even stronger than it was before. So it happens that among the thorns of pagan skepticism and of amoral doctrines, the lily of the church flourishes as a magnificent moral power. Now, so the sanctity of the Catholic Church during the times of the great apostasy initiated by Vatican II is to utterly reject, reprove, and condemn the heresies and errors of the Novus Ordo, as well as its wicked disciplines and false liturgical practices. So that is how that is being fulfilled by faithful Catholics, was to reject it and not to compromise with it. Look at the sanctity exteriorly apparent to the eye of the mind, mystically rooted in the Holy Ghost, concerning the most holy root of life. Aquinas said, if it is said, I believe in the Holy Catholic Church, this must be understood according as our faith is referred to the Holy Ghost, who sanctifies the church. So the sense is, I believe in the Holy Ghost sanctifying the church. That's implicit in the creed. I believe in the Holy Catholic Church. You are implicitly saying you believe in the Holy Ghost as he is sanctifying the church. It's only in that way that the church could be an object of faith, as it is assisted by the Holy Ghost. Objections. Whatever turns away men from Christ cannot be considered holy, but many Roman dogmas turn away men from Christ. Therefore, by reason of doctrine, the sanctity of the Roman Church is deficient. Proof of the Minor, the sacrifice of the Mass indicates a negation of the sufficiency of the merits of Christ. This is a typical Protestant objection. The veneration of the Virgin Mary draws away souls from Christ our Redeemer. Sacramental confession and indulgences contribute to the depravity of morals. You see, they think that you get away with evil by indulgences. You see, that you have a license to do whatever you want. The doctrine of the sacraments which sanctify ex opere operato has the effect that Christian life is considered to be something merely exterior. Just get baptized and you're fine, and everything. You just go through the motions, and you don't have to do any interior acts in order to be holy. Just go to those opere operato sacraments and you're done. Okay. A response: having conceded the major, I distinguish the minor. The dogmas of the Church of Rome turn people away from Christ in themselves, I deny. When it is distorted by the adversaries, I concede. We will look at each of these considerations. So that's typically what people do. Well, it's common that your adversary will construct something that isn't true about what you're saying or doing. They construct the model and then they criticize the model that they have made. You see, that happens a lot with the thesis. They don't understand totally the thesis, and then they have a model of it and they criticize the model, and they just don't understand. So you have to be careful of that. In other words, don't respond to the model. You have to tear down their model first and say, this is what the question is, not something that is in your mind about this, that, or the other thing. The sacrifice of the Mass excludes the sufficiency of Christ. I distinguish, if it were different from the sacrifice of the cross with regard to substance and value, I concede. In other words, if it were not the same sacrifice as that of the cross, well, then that would be true. With regard to the manner only and the application of the value, I deny. So the holy sacrifice of the Mass differs from the sacrifice of Christ only in manner and also in the application. You see, because Christ on the cross made it possible for everyone to be saved, but the application of the merits of Christ had to be done by the church. See, so it's one thing to have a medicine in the jar, but it's another thing to have it applied to you. See, so in other words, say like you have, a sore back or something, and somebody has something to put on your back, or it's one thing that it's in the jar, but it's another thing to have it applied. It doesn't do you any good when it's in the jar. See, so the death of Christ made it possible. He made actual graces and sanctifying grace possible, but you have to be baptized, you have to lead a good life, you have to go to confession, you have to do all the things that are necessary for salvation. And the actual graces that are given to the world come through the holy sacrifice of the Mass. The whole purpose of the church is to apply the effects of the redemption to souls. So it does that principally by the sacraments, but also by preaching. by exhortations in the confessional, by good example of clergy and religious, by all sorts of ways in which the salvific effects are applied. That's so you see the Protestants say, well, there's only one mediator, and then you have the Virgin Mary and all the priests, and I think I maybe told you I responded to that. If a Protestant minister preaches a sermon, he's a mediator. If Christ wanted no sub-mediators or helper mediators, he would come and give sermons himself, which he could do. So the Protestant, they have their clergy. So that would be something to respond with. And that Protestant fellow said, yeah, that's true. He hasn't converted yet, though. I don't know. I just think he's... St. Paul says, always looking, never finding. It's an expression of St. Paul. Always seeking, never finding. There's a lot of people like that. Sort of they go to museums, or it's sort of they breeze through the Catholic faith as if it were some sort of exposition. Well, that's interesting. That's interesting. They never do it. But we'll see, maybe with time. So this was said in the Council of Trent, for the victim is one and the same now offering by the ministry of priests, who then offered himself on the cross, the manner alone of offering being different. Likewise, Christ is said to leave to his own beloved spouse, the church, the visible sacrifice, such as the nature of man requires, whereby that bloody sacrifice, once to be accomplished on the cross, might be represented, and the memory thereof remain even unto the end of the world, and its salutary virtue be applied to the remission of those sins which we daily commit. St. Thomas. However, nothing stops Christ from always living to make intercession for us. That's in Hebrews. It's a lot about the sacrifice of Christ in Hebrews. That the veneration of the Blessed Virgin Mary draws men away from Christ, I distinguish. By a disordered veneration, I concede. By an ordered veneration, I deny. The principal motive of venerating the Blessed Virgin Mary is the dignity of the Mother of God. From this it is understood that whatever is attributed to the honor of the Blessed Virgin Mary is referred to Christ. So she is, like the priest, a mediator of the effects of redemption. The church is a mediator. Priests are mediators. Religious are mediators. There's all of these help. In other words, Christ is the single mediator, and anybody that's helping him is empowered by him. Just as, the president doesn't run everything by himself. He has a whole cabinet. He has probably hundreds of people helping him to put through things that he wants. See, he doesn't, type his own letters and do everything by himself. And so neither does Christ do that. For the facts have proven that Christ is loved most by those who venerate his mother sincerely, such as St. Bernard of Clairvaux and St. Thomas Aquinas. So it was never an obstacle to the love of Christ, or any kind of true devotion to our Blessed Lady was not in any way an obstacle to That confession is said to be a source of depravity of morals. I likewise distinguish. Confession according to the Catholic faith I deny. According to the imagination of Protestants I concede. The Protestants falsely contend that in the Catholic Church sins are forgiven by virtue of the exterior confession only, without contrition for the sin. So all you do is go in and say what you did. I robbed 5 banks. Oh, okay, you're absolved. That's what they think it is. All right, the priest is going to say to you, you have to stop robbing banks. And he's going to extract from you the a sincere contrition and also purpose of amendment. That means yes, and that gets, it's fairly easy when it comes to robbing banks, but typically they are living in a sinful relationship with somebody, like they're living together or they're improperly married or something like that. That's when it gets tough, because you have to tell them you have to give up the live-in. You have to separate from the live-in. The cohabitation, typical today, is very common today, and you have to live separated. If you want to get married, you have to go see the priest to get married, but you have to live separately, etc. And and then they become an occasion of sin. In other words, if there's some sort of girlfriend, let's say, you have to say, you can't see this person anymore because she's an occasion of sin to you, because you have to give up all of the near occasions of sin. That's part of the confession. So, there are times, and sometimes they say, well, I can't do that. And then you say, well, until you do that, you defer absolution. You just say, when you're ready to do that, you can come back. But effectively, you refuse it. Yes?
And what would the counsel to them be if they had a child, like live as brother and sister until you can get properly married? Or
you wouldn't do that in the confessional. You would say, you cannot act as husband and wife. That's how you say it. But you need to see the priest. You have to come in, and because you have to examine a lot of things to see if one has been married already or something like that. You can't, and they have to. There's all the brother and sister thing that is certain conditions. One, it has to be a secret, so it can't be well known. Two, in other words, that you observe perfect chastity. Whatever is improper between brother and sister is improper between yourselves. They have to sleep in separate bedrooms. Okay, and there's a third one I can't remember right now. So it has to be secret. Sometime, and it has to be a serious reason. That's number three. In other words, they can't be just a childless couple. They can easily separate. A serious reason would be typically children, or in the case of older people, that they both need to stay together for their Social Security. In other words, they can't pay for their apartment or their house. That would be a serious reason. But you have to get them to all those three things have to come together for that. So you couldn't really do that in the confessional because you would need the consent of both. See, so you'd have to say, but you would have to say you have to separate. Because they can separate, for a time. They can still support. One could support the other, or something like that. But they could separate for a time. But for the long term, you have to get into all of those things. So you'll see a lot of that because there's a lot of cohabitation today. So people come back from that. They come back to the Catholic faith, in these terrible conditions. We get many times a week marriage cases, and some of them are so complex you think I don't even know how to solve this. And it used to be that you could get dispensations from the bishop, but you can't always, it's not possible, So there's various channels that you had to solve things in the past that you can't use today. So you'll see it. Yes, wait until you do the tract on matrimony in canon law and in moral theology. You just wish no one would ever get married. That's the only. So many problems. So anyway, how do we get on that? So the Protestants falsely contend that the Catholic Church, sins are forgiven by virtue of the exterior confession only. For the Council of, but this is false. Contrition, which holds the first place amongst the aforesaid acts of the penitent, is a sorrow of mind and a detestation for sin committed with the purpose of not sinning for the future. Very important. This movement of contrition was at all times necessary for obtaining the pardon of sins, and in one who has fallen after baptism, it then at length prepares for the remission of the sins when it is united with confidence in the divine mercy and with the desire of performing the other things which are required for rightly receiving this sacrament. Wherefore the Holy Synod declares that that means, when it says synod, that means the Council of Trent, that this contrition contains not only a cessation from sin and the purpose and the beginning of a new life, but also a hatred of the old life, agreeably to that saying, cast away from you all your transgressions by which you have transgressed, and make to yourselves a new heart and a new spirit. The utility, however, of confession is very great concerning this. Origen, who died, that means died, that dagger. That doesn't mean he died by a dagger, but that means he died around then. 230 said, those who sin, if indeed they hide and retain a sin within themselves, are interiorly urged and nearly suffocated by the phlegm or humor of sin. If, however, he himself becomes his own accuser, then he accuses himself and confesses, he at the same time vomits up sin and digests every cause of sin. So, a similar response should be given with regard to those things which are objected concerning indulgences. The adversaries, in order to draw the Roman Church into being supremely hated by all men, have invented some notion of indulgences in such a way that crimes, both past and future, of those who are not contrite are condoned. That is not true, as you know. Indulgences remit temporal punishment due to sin, because there is the sin involves the culpa, which is the guilt of sin, which is remitted by penance, the sacrament of penance, but there remains the temporal punishment due to sin, even after the sin is forgiven. That's true both of venial sins and mortal sins. Compare it to the kid who throws a ball and breaks the window of his neighbor. Smash. Goes in the... And he says, oh, I'm so sorry for breaking your window. And the lady says, oh, that's okay. But there's the window that has to be repaired. See? So there's a damage to God's glory when you sin, and that has to be repaired, and that's known as temporal punishment due to sin. You have to think about that. See, so the way you remit that is through good works and prayer, good works, and also indulgences. So a very good practice, because you have to intend to get indulgences. So you can't read a prayer and then decide I want the indulgence. Or do something. You have to intend, and the best thing to do is in the morning, intend to gain all of the indulgences that you can that day. That covers the whole day. So all of the things you do, to say the rosary in the presence of the Blessed Sacrament, even as it is in the tabernacle, is a plenary indulgence. Yeah, I didn't know that, did you? All of those are in the Raccolta. So there's a lot of things that are indulgence, a lot of prayers after Mass. The prayer before the crucifix is heavily indulgenced. You should say that after Mass. It's in your missal or prayer book, typically. Various other things are heavily indulgenced. Yeah. So that's what it does. And around November 2nd, you can gain those, and at other times too, according to the decree of the indulgence. For the souls in purgatory. Ordinarily, you can gain it only for yourself, but some you can gain for the souls in purgatory. See, so during the whole octave too. See, so visiting a cemetery, for example, which we do every year. There's a lady in Florida whose husband is buried right up the road here on up by this Novus Ordo church that is not far from there. And so we've made a practice in the past few years to go to the man's grave and pray for him. And so you get the indulgence of going to the cemetery. Yeah. but you can get that indulgence for him. So, and she's very pleased by that. This is Caro in Vero Beach. She goes to the Mass in Vero Beach. So, this movement of contrition was at all times. We said that, yes, indulgences. The adversaries, in order to draw the Roman Church in such a way, but it is certain by the testimony of all theologians and documents that what is conceded is an indulgence of sins only in the broad sense, that is, of the punishments for sins for those who have sincerely converted to God and who have expiated the stain of mortal sins. For this reason, St. Thomas in the Quodlibetales says concerning those who make the sign of the cross, in order that someone be able to gain an indulgence, it is required that he who seeks one be in the state of charity. See, so you have to be in the state of grace in order to obtain an indulgence. So there's a lot of conditions on it. That the doctrine concerning opus operatum, that refers to opere operato. In other words, that a sacrament is valid simply by doing the sacrament and requires no participation of your own except that you intend to receive it. Reduces the Christian life to merely external sanctity, I distinguish. The invented doctrine I concede, the true doctrine I deny. Opus operatum is the power of the sacraments by which, through the merits and institution of Christ, they give grace instrumentally. There is required that those who receive them as a condition sine qua non do not place an obstacle to the grace. So if you were to approach any of the sacraments in a, say, a dishonest way, and I'm just doing this to please my girlfriend or something like that, you would not receive the sacrament. Typically, it may be a baptism or something. I don't know. It's just a ceremony. So you're not sincerely intending to receive the sacrament. So you're intending to go through the ceremony, but it's you have to, or ordination. Sometimes people were forced into ordination by their parents, and they approached they didn't want to take on the obligations, and they approached the altar without an intention. I don't intend to receive it. They would not be ordained. But you had to prove that. See, because sometimes priests would get into holy orders and they don't like being celibate, something like that. And they say, I was forced into it and I did not intend. You have to go through a trial with witnesses. That's a hard thing to prove because most of the time you're going to keep that to yourself. That's a hard thing to prove. See, so but there would be an ecclesiastical trial to determine that. Because the church is not going to let you off the hook just for nothing. Yes?
So would that be sacrilegious?
Oh, absolutely.
Right. Just making sure.
Yes. Yes. Definition of sacrilege, the misuse of a sacred person, place, or thing. Person, place, or thing. The heretics are horrified by the fanatical opinion of opus operatum, and they say that it is like a magical power. But they do not distinguish between the supernatural and the magical, nor should one consider that opinion fanatical, which affirms that there is required a disposition in those who receive it, but who deny that disposition is the efficient cause of grace. In other words, it is an occasional cause, which is part of the efficient cause. Objection 2, those who study comparative religions, who have traveled into Catholic religion, see sufficiently that most of the things that you believe to prove the sanctity of the Church namely the sacraments, the hierarchy, the liturgy, the ceremonies, religious orders, and even moral precepts and the principles of asceticism, are drawn from pagan things. That there is a strong connection between pagan religions and the Catholic Church, that the religion of Catholics is in part constituted from pagan superstition, therefore nothing appears eminent in the Roman Church. I distinguish the antecedent that these things are seen by those who consider the Church materially, let it pass. Who see the Church formally, I deny. Those things which are seen in the Church must be completely investigated in order that we acquire a knowledge of how they are in it. Amelino, you can see that, found the sources of our religion in Egypt. Harnack, we saw him before, in Greece. Bournouf, Louis Bournouf, was a leading 19th century Orientalist and racialist whose ideas influenced the development of Theosophy and Arianism. That's the German thing, Nazi stuff. He was a professor of the Faculté des Lettres at Nancy University, then principal of the French School at Athens. He was also the author of Sanskrit French Dictionary. Sanskrit is the ancient language of India, and that is considered the sort of the origin of the Indo-European languages. So all of them are related. From all that whole swath of languages are related. In a very, obviously French doesn't sound anything like Sanskrit, but they're considered to be related. So that's who he is. In India, Herbert Spencer, E. Claude, and others thought that they perceived connections with the Christian and Catholic religion in the popular folkloric traditions, but they do not err entirely in this matter. Without a doubt, they found similar things. For example, the Romans used incense. They would incense their idols. So the church did take certain things that were, say, neutral in the sense it could be used in a good way, to the, for use in the Catholic Church. I'm trying to think of some other things. The Christmas tree, for example, came from the German pagans who worshiped trees. St. Boniface cut one down, and then he decorated it and said, "This is a symbol of Christ." It's the origin of the Christmas tree. In general, the church would use anything it could that was decent in religions that it found in various places. It would adopt them for, just if it was, St. Gregory told St. Augustine to do that, St. Augustine of Canterbury, to do that with regard to the English. So whatever you can take. So just to, not so that it's not a jolt on the culture of the people, you might say. The church permitted the priests to say Mass with their hats on because in China it was considered to be informal not to wear a hat. So they would say Mass. There was permission given to do that. But the true supernatural religion of Christ does not reject the natural things of the mind and heart and of the entire human character, but accepts many things which must be subordinated to a higher order and therefore must be perfected by them. So that's what the church would always do with those things. Sacrifice, altar, and fasting in no way exclusively pertain to the supernatural life, as St. Thomas teaches in the Secunda, etc. There are other things of this type. What about the fact that very ancient teachers of the church openly speak about the fact that the human soul is naturally Christian? And St. Justin talking about the logos spermatikos, which is the seed of the word. It's loosely translated, the seminal logos, so seed of the logos. And look at the footnote. the entire text of Justin. And this is important because much ado has been made by the modernists, including John Paul II, concerning this text, as if to justify their principle that God dwells supernaturally in all men apart from grace. That's very important for the modernists. So, and those of the Stoic school, this is St. Justin Martyr, since so far as their moral teaching went, they were admirable, as were also the poets in some particulars, on account of the seed of reason implanted in every race of men. We know how we know hated and put to death. Heraclitus, for instance, and among those of our own time, Musonius and others. For as we intimated, the devils have always affected that all those who anyhow live a reasonable and earnest life and shun vice be hated. And it is nothing wonderful, if wonderful means there to wonder at, if the devils are proved to cause those to be much worse hated who live not according to a part only of the word diffused among men, but by the knowledge and contemplation of the whole word, which is Christ. And they, having been shut up in eternal fire, imagine doing this in Latin, shall suffer their punishment, just punishment and penalty. He wrote this in Latin. For if they are even now overthrown by men through the name of Jesus Christ, this is an intimation of the punishment in eternal fire, which is to be inflicted on themselves and those who serve them. For thus did both all the prophets foretell and our own teacher Jesus teach. So it is the seed of reason, the logos spermatikos. It is not the logos, meaning referring to Christ. So that's the point. But John Paul, he made a big deal out of it. See, this is church tradition. We all have Christ in us. St. Augustine in Contra Faustum says that we have certain things in common with the pagans, but a different end. Nature has taught men similar creeds, but the essential difference between the church and other religions is evident from the dogmas and morals which it expresses through its creeds. So, for example, by nature, you can reason to the existence of God and many of his attributes, his omnipotence, his mercy, etc. You apply to him whatever is desirable and good in human beings in an infinite way. 2, those who accuse the church of superstition do so without merit. Some people are often deceived by an appearance of piety toward God before they have been completely instructed in religion. Others follow true principles in a foolish manner or indulge too much in the excesses of popular devotion. So again, they're not following the rule book. These are things that are distortions. But all of these things cannot be brought against the church, which does not cease to apply remedies for the correction of abuses. But for our adversaries, it is necessary only to intend not to confuse those things which in fact differ. The things which the pagans use should not be considered to be contrary by the sole fact that they are used in the pagan or Christian religion. Errors and accidental excesses among Catholics do not corrupt the essence of the Catholic Church. So, in other words, what is being used and how is it being used in the Catholic Church if it is borrowed from paganism? Secondly, don't attach to the church the distortions that some people might make of certain things. For example, in Mexico, this is in many cases a holdover of the Aztec religion among some primitive Catholics, you might say. In other words, there's certain superstitions that they have, which is just wrong. The missionaries complained that it was very hard to draw them away from those things, extremely hard, in Mexico. So you see some of them coming into churches and doing essentially Aztec things in front of the statue of the Virgin Mary or something like that. In other words, it's not uncommon. And Bishop Dolan said that most of the fervor of religion in Mexico is cultural and that when he was there, you would have a church full of people and maybe 3 or 4 communions. In other words, you might have 100 people at Mass, but only just a handful of people would come up to receive communion. In other words, that most of it was merely cultural. And they would have all of the external things. The processions are big on the Spanish culture came over too. There's nothing wrong with processions, but I mean, if it is purely cultural, if it's something like a 4th of July parade, it's a purely cultural thing, then it loses all of its sacred aspect. See, but that was a problem in particularly Mexico, not so much in the rest of South America, but particularly Mexico. And to this day it exists, especially in the rural areas in south of Mexico City. So that can't be counted against the church if there's some residue of that sort of thing. And the church strives against it, obviously, but in some cases you see it. So often the Church of Rome has fallen into perversity of morals. Therefore, by reason of its members, it cannot be said to be holy. The antecedent, this is a very, very typical one. The antecedent is proved by numberless examples. It is certain that Alexander VI and the Roman pontiffs were of corrupt morals. It is not certain. There's a whole book on it. I think it's in the library on the Borgias, written by a Protestant. All right, fairly recently, in the past 20 years or so, saying that all of the accusations against Alexander VI came from a single priest who hated the Borgias, and that there was no other evidence for his misconduct except for that one priest who was like a gossip monger. The Borgias were not popular. They were Spanish. They were not popular in Rome and in Italy in general, the Borgias. And he was a Borgia pope, and so he smeared him because he said there is no evidence for it when he was a cardinal. He was a legate to Spain. Absolutely no evidence of misconduct when he was a younger man even. That would be more typical. There's nothing in his background that would testify to any kind of misconduct. And then he becomes pope, and this one priest smears him. He said that's all there is on his and he said otherwise he was actually a very good pope for the Catholic Church, which is true. But Alexander VI is the one they always bring up. But it would be good to read that book. I know I put it in the library. I bought it myself, but I put it in the library. It's called The Borgias. It's pretty thick though. But you could read the part on Alexander VI, because that comes up all the time. And he gives I would say, a very convincing, especially if there's no background. In other words, if he were dissolute his whole life, I'd say he'd probably dissolute when he's a pope. But there's no background. There's nothing. So that's but he's the favorite to bring up, Alexander VI. And other Roman pontiffs were of corrupt morals. The clergy at the beginning of the 16th century had turned away from the gospel. It's not true. The religious orders have not been worthy of their founders. The lay people have been filled with vices. Response. In general, I distinguish the antecedent. Often perversity of this type is seen in many people in the church. I concede. In the church itself, I deny. That sinners are found in the Roman church does not contradict our thesis in any way. In this field, by the teaching of Christ, the weeds and the wheat grow all the way to the harvest. But these 3 things must be considered. 1, that the morals are not corrupted in virtue of Catholic doctrine, but rather in absolute repugnance to Catholic doctrine. In other words, they're not following the instruction book. 2, even in the worst of times, there were examples of the most outstanding virtue and of many who had hearts which were clean of vices. And that's true in 16th and 14th, 15th, and 16th century Rome and Italy in general, and some great saints. 3, the vitality of the church has prepared new helps always for its members, by which it has overcome the iniquity of the times. St. Augustine says very accurately, responding to adversaries, seek for fruit in the field, seek for wheat in the floor, they will be found easily and will present themselves to the inquirer. Why do you look so exclusively at the dross? You see, the in the mill, the dross of the wheat goes to the, what is the leftover goes to the floor. Why do you use the roughness of the hedge to scare away the inexperience from the fatness of the garden? So responding to each singly, concerning that which has been said about the Roman pontiff, I distinguish. There were a few evil pontiffs, let it pass. That there were many, I deny. Let us concede that Alexander VI fell very seriously into vice. But even if we should concede this, the sanctity of the Roman Church is not extinguished. For even those pontiffs who are alleged to have been the worst have preserved intact the sanctity of doctrine. Note, something which cannot be said of the Vatican II popes. Second, with a few exceptions, the Roman pontiffs were very righteous men, and in most of them there was evident a great uprightness of life, with the effect that the Apostolic See by far exceeded all other royal families in sanctity. Third, some men from among Protestants themselves, more desirous of truth than of making reproaches and accusations, have answered absolutely by certain documents the false accusations against the Roman pontiffs. So we will stop there. Such as Voigt and Gregory VII and Friedrich Herter in Innocent III. And Herter was a Catholic. He was a Protestant who. So, all right. Today is 17. All right. Very good. So I said 9 to 18, right? It was because you had 1 to 8, so 9 to 18. The next time we have a class. Well, let's see where we are. I've done 1/3 of the book so far. That's not bad. It's all right.